She walked into the wrong hospital room and found a terrified little boy who needed someone to stay. He turned out to be the son of the city's most powerful mafia boss. One night of kindness changed everything. Now she's living in his fortress. He's falling for her, and his enemies think she's his weakness. The fluorescent lights in St. Catherine's Hospital buzzed like dying wasps at 11:47 p.m., and Nina Hayes was running on her third cup of terrible vending machine coffee and sheer stubbornness. "Miss Hayes, you need to take the service elevator to Wing C," the frazzled intake nurse said, barely looking up from her computer. "The boy's paperwork says VIP transfer." Nina blinked. "VIP? There must be a mistake. Tommy's from the shelter. He doesn't have. System says VIP. Third floor, East Wing." The nurse thrust a visitor badge at her. "Hurry. They're prepping for surgery in 20 minutes. Nina grabbed the badge, her sneakers squeaking against the polished floor as she jogged toward the elevators. Tommy, the 7-year-old from New Hope Shelter, needed his appendix out. She'd promised to stay with him because he was terrified of hospitals. His mom had died in one last year. The elevator doors opened to a different world. Gone were the chipped paint and overcrowded hallways of the public wards. Here, soft recessed lighting glowed against cream-colored walls. Abstract art hung in gilded frames. The smell of antiseptic mixed with something expensive. Leather? Fresh flowers? A security guard in a black suit eyed her as she stepped out, his hand resting casually near his hip in a way that made Nina's stomach tighten. "I'm looking for room 347, she said, showing her badge. "Tommy Rodriguez." The guard's earpiece crackled. He pressed a finger to it, listening, then waved her through without a word. Weird. Nina hurried down the hallway, her canvas bag bouncing against her hip. She'd packed Tommy's favorite book, Where the Wild Things Are, and a stuffed dinosaur he slept with. Poor kid. He'd already been through so much. Room 347's door was slightly ajar. She pushed it open and froze. This wasn't Tommy. A small boy sat on the massive hospital bed, knees pulled to his chest, dark curls falling over his forehead. He couldn't have been more than 6. His eyes, huge and brown and absolutely terrified, locked onto hers. Behind him, medical equipment beeped softly. An untouched dinner tray sat on the side table. "Hi," Nina said gently, her instincts overriding her confusion. Something about the raw fear in those eyes gutted her. "Are you okay?" The boy shook his head violently. "They're gonna hurt me," he whispered, his voice cracking. "They have needles." Nina's heart squeezed. She'd deal with the room mix-up in a minute. Right now, there was a terrified child in front of her, and that was all that mattered. "Can I come in?" she asked. He nodded just barely. Nina stepped inside and let the door close behind her. She didn't approach the bed. She'd learned from years of working with traumatized kids that sometimes the best thing you could do was make yourself smaller, less threatening. So she sat down. Right there on the cold hospital floor, cross-legged, like she had all the time in the world. "My name's Nina," she said conversationally. "I'm guessing you're not a big fan of hospitals." "I hate them." The boy's knuckles were white where he gripped his knees. "My mom. She was in a hospital. She didn't come home." "Oh, God. I'm so sorry," Nina said softly. "That's really scary. Papa says I have to get the treatment or I'll get sicker. But the doctors," his voice broke. "They don't listen. They just hold me down." Nina's jaw tightened. She'd seen it before. Medical professionals who forgot that fear made everything worse, especially for children who'd already lost so much. "What's your name?" she asked. "Luca." "Well, Luca, here's what I think." Nina dug into her bag and pulled out the worn copy of Where the Wild Things Are. "I think you're brave for being here, even though you're scared. And I think maybe we could make a deal." His eyes flickered with interest. "What kind of deal?" "I'll stay right here with you. I won't leave, and we'll read stories until you get sleepy. When the doctors come, you can squeeze my hand as hard as you want. If it gets too scary, you tell them to stop and we'll figure it out together. Sound fair?" Lucas studied her for a long moment. You promise you won't leave? Promise. You promise you won't let them hurt me? I promise I'll make sure you're okay. The treatments aren't supposed to hurt, they're supposed to help. But if something doesn't feel right, we'll speak up. Together. Deal? Slowly, Luca uncurled himself. Okay. Nina smiled and opened the book. Let the wild rumpus start. Hours dissolved into a strange, quiet bubble. Nina read until her voice grew hoarse. When Luca finally allowed the nurses to check his vitals, she held his hand and made him laugh by making silly faces behind their backs. When he cried during the insertion, she told him about the time she'd been so scared of needles that she'd hidden under a chair at the dentist's office. Really? He asked, hiccuping. Really? And you know what? The dentist had to bribe me with 3 lollipops. Did it work? Absolutely. Never underestimate the power of sugar. Around 3 a.m., after the nurses had administered his medications and finally left them alone, Luca's eyelids began to droop. He'd migrated from the bed to the floor, curling up beside Nina with his head on her lap. Nina, he mumbled, half asleep. Yeah, buddy. You're nice. Not like Papa's friends. Nina stroked his hair gently, not really listening, just trying to soothe him into sleep. Your Papa sounds like he has interesting friends. They have guns. Nina's hand stilled for just a fraction of a second, but she forced herself to keep the gentle motion going. Kids said strange things when they were tired. Maybe he meant security guards. Maybe his dad was a police officer or something. Well, she whispered, no guns here. Just stories and terrible hospital lighting. Lucas smiled against her leg and was asleep within minutes. Nina leaned her head back against the wall, exhaustion finally catching up with her. She'd figure out where Tommy was in the morning. She'd apologize for the room confusion. Her eyes drifted closed. She never heard the door open at dawn. She never saw the 6 armed men in black suits who entered first, hands near their weapons. She never noticed the tall man in the expensive charcoal suit who stopped dead in the doorway, his cold gray eyes widening at the sight of a stranger sleeping on his floor with his son's head in her lap. All she knew was that when she woke, everything was about to change. Nina woke to the distinct sound of a gun being cocked. Her eyes flew open. 6 men in black suits surrounded the hospital room, all staring at her with expressions that ranged from suspicion to barely concealed hostility. One had his hand inside his jacket. Another blocked the door. And standing in the center of them all was a man who made the air itself feel heavier. He was tall, over 6 feet, with dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble. Sharp jaw, cold gray eyes, and a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Nina made in 6 months. Everything about him screamed power and danger. He was staring at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Who? He said quietly, his voice smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. Are you? Nina's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked down. Luca was still asleep, his small body curled against her, completely peaceful. She didn't want to wake him, didn't want to scare him. I'm Nina, she whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. There was a mix-up with the rooms last night. I'm a volunteer from New Hope Shelter. I was supposed to be with another child, but I ended up here, and Luca was scared, so you stayed. The man's eyes flickered to his son, and something shifted in his expression. Something almost vulnerable before it vanished behind ice again. All night. He needed someone, Nina said simply. One of the suited men stepped forward, shorter than the others, with a thick neck and a scar above his eyebrow. Boss, she could be anyone. Could be wired. Could be. Rocco, the tall man's voice cut like a blade. Look at him. Everyone's eyes went to Luca. The boy was sleeping like Nina had never seen a child sleep in a hospital, deeply, peacefully, one hand clutching the stuffed dinosaur from her bag, the other resting on her knee. His face was relaxed. The tension that had been in his small shoulders last night was completely gone. A doctor in a white coat appeared in the doorway, her eyes widening. Mr. Romano, she stopped, staring at Luca. Is he? Sleeping? Apparently, Mr. Romano's jaw tightened. When did you last see him sleep through the night, Dr. Chin? The doctor moved closer, her professional mask slipping into genuine astonishment. Not since he was admitted 3 weeks ago. We've tried sedatives, sleep therapy, anxiety medication. Nothing worked. He screams every time we approach him after dark. Until her Rocco's voice dripped with suspicion as he jerked his chin toward Nina. Dr. Chin crouched down, studying Luca's sleeping face like it was a medical miracle. His vitals are perfect. Heart rate, breathing, everything stable. And look, he actually took his medications. She pointed to the empty 4-bag. He hasn't let us finish a full dose in days. Mr. Romano, the name tickled something in Nina's memory, but she couldn't place it, crouched down slowly. He was still watching Nina, but his expression had shifted from cold calculation to something she couldn't read. How did you do it? He asked. I didn't do anything special, Nina said honestly. I just listened to him, read him stories, told him he was brave. He was scared because nobody was explaining things in a way he could understand. The needles, the treatments, to him, it was just people holding him down and hurting him. We explained the medical necessity, Dr. Chin started. Did you explain it to him? Nina interrupted gently. Or did you explain it to his father while Luca heard a bunch of scary words he didn't understand? The doctor's mouth closed. Rocco moved closer, his hand definitely on his weapon now. Boss, we need to run a full background check. This is too convenient. She shows up out of nowhere, gets close to the kid. I'm a 26-year-old volunteer who makes $12 an hour helping kids who have nothing, Nina said, her fear turning into frustration. She was tired, her back hurt from sleeping on the floor, and these men were looking at her like she was some kind of criminal. I don't know who you people are or why this room needs armed guards, but I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm here because a little boy was terrified and alone. You have no idea who we are? Rocco laughed, but it wasn't a friendly sound. You expect us to believe. Enough, Mr. Romano raised one hand, and everyone fell silent instantly. He studied Nina for another long moment, his gray eyes searching her face. Then, slowly, carefully, he reached out and brushed a strand of hair off Luca's forehead. The gesture was so gentle, so full of love, that Nina's throat tightened. This was a man who would burn down the world for his son. She could see it in the way his hand trembled slightly, in the shadows under his eyes that said he hadn't slept in weeks either. Miss, he waited. Hayes. Nina Hayes. Miss Hayes, he stood, towering over her again. My son has been sick for months. We've had the best doctors, the best specialists, the best everything money can buy. And not one of them could get him to sleep through the night. His voice dropped lower. You did it in hours. It wasn't a compliment. It was a statement of fact that clearly unsettled him. Sometimes kids just need someone who isn't trying to fix them, Nina said softly. Someone who just sees them. Lucas stirred against her leg, mumbling something in his sleep. Nina automatically placed a gentle hand on his back, soothing him without thinking. The boy settled immediately. Mr. Romano's eyes tracked the movement. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. Rocco, he said, still watching Nina. Full background check. I want to know everything, where she lives, where she works, who she knows. Everything. Already on it, boss. But, Mr. Romano continued, his eyes finally meeting Nina's again. Do it quietly. And do not disturb her, or the boy while you work. Rocco's eyebrows shot up. Boss. That's an order. The room fell silent except for Luca's soft breathing and the steady beep of the monitors. Mr. Romano adjusted his cufflinks, a gesture that seemed more habit than necessity. Dr. Chun, reschedule Luca's morning treatment to this afternoon. Let him sleep, he glanced at Nina. You'll stay until he wakes? It was phrased as a question, but Nina had the distinct feeling it wasn't really optional. Of course, she said. He nodded once, crisp and businesslike, then turned toward the door. His men fell into formation around him like a well-trained unit. At the threshold, he paused and looked back. Miss Hayes, he said quietly. Thank you. Then he was gone, taking his dangerous energy with him, leaving Nina alone with a sleeping child and the growing certainty that she'd just stepped into something far more complicated than a simple hospital room mix-up. Luca woke up 2 hours later with a smile on his face, something Dr. Chin said she hadn't seen since his admission. Nina stayed while he ate breakfast, while the nurses checked his vitals, while he told her about his favorite video games and his dog named Brutus, who was bigger than a car. By noon, she'd finally convinced him she had to leave. But you'll come back? Luca asked, his eyes wide and worried. Nina's heart twisted. She wanted to promise, but she had no idea what was happening here or if Mr. Romano would even allow her back. I hope so, buddy. Promise. She couldn't lie to him. I'll try my very best. It seemed to be enough. Luca hugged her tight before letting her go. Nina made it exactly 15 steps down the hallway before Mr. Romano materialized from a side corridor like he'd been waiting. Miss Hayes. A moment. It wasn't a request. He guided her to a private consultation room, all dark wood and leather chairs, and closed the door behind them. Up close, without the crowd of armed men, he was somehow even more intimidating. And younger than she'd first thought, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of face that belonged on magazine covers if it weren't so cold. My team finished their research, he said, getting straight to business. You are who you said you are. Nina Elizabeth Hayes, 26, volunteer at New Hope Children's Shelter for 3 years. Clean record. No connections to law enforcement, rival organizations, or anyone I need to worry about. Nina's stomach churned. You investigated me? Of course I did. You spent the night with my son, he said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I also know you live in a studio apartment in Parkside. You have $32,000 in student debt, and your car failed inspection last month. Heat flooded Nina's cheeks, anger mixed with embarrassment. That's invasive. That's necessary. He moved to stand by the window, hands in his pockets, looking out at the city skyline. I want to hire you. Nina blinked. What? As Luca's live-in caretaker. You'd stay at my estate, manage his daily routine, help with his medical treatments, provide emotional support. I'll pay you $200,000 a year, plus room and board, health insurance, and a security detail. The number hit Nina like a physical blow. $200,000. That was more than she'd make in 5 years at the shelter. That was enough to pay off her debt, help her sister with her tuition, actually save money for the first time in her adult life. It was too much. Mr. Romano.
Adrian.
Adrian, she corrected, though his first name felt strange on her tongue. I appreciate the offer, but I can't. I don't know anything about your world, and frankly, the guns and the background checks and the way everyone treats you she stopped herself. Like what? His voice was soft, dangerous. Like you're someone to be afraid of. Adrian turned from the window, and for the first time, something like amusement flickered in his eyes. I am someone to be afraid of, Miss Hayes. But I've never hurt a child, and I never will. My son needs you. That's all that matters to me. He needs therapy and consistency, not a stranger moving into his house. You're not a stranger. You're the only person who's gotten through to him in months. Adrian's jaw tightened. I'm offering you a chance to change your life. Most people would jump at it. I'm not most people. Nina headed for the door. I'm sorry, but no. She left before he could respond, her heart pounding in her ears. The shelter was in chaos when Nina arrived that afternoon. Kids were crying in the common room. Staff members huddled in worried clusters. And Margaret, the shelter director, a steel-haired woman who'd been running New Hope for 20 years, sat in her office with her head in her hands. Marge. Nina knocked softly. What's wrong? Margaret looked up, her eyes red. The city cut our funding. 60%, effective next month. We have to close 2 wings and let half the staff go, her voice cracked. We'll have to turn away kids, Nina. Kids with nowhere else to go. Nina's blood ran cold.
They can't do that.
They just did. Margaret handed her an official letter, the city seal stamped at the top. I'm sorry, honey. You're on the list. Last hired, first fired. Nina stared at the letter, the words blurring together.
She needed this job.
Not for the money. God knew she'd never done it for the money, but because these kids needed advocates. They needed people who gave a damn. When, she whispered. 2 weeks. Nina walked out in a daze. She'd figure something out. She always did. Maybe she could find another nonprofit, or pick up extra shifts at the diner, or… Well, look who it is. Every muscle in Nina's body locked up. Mark Sullivan stood beside her car, arms crossed, that familiar smirk on his face. He looked the same as he had a year ago, sandy hair, charming smile that never reached his eyes, polo shirt tucked into expensive jeans. Like he'd just stepped off a golf course instead of out of her worst memories. Hello, Nina. What do you want, Mark? She kept her voice flat, emotionless. Showing fear only made him worse. Heard you got yourself a new job. Private caretaker for some rich family. He pushed off her car and moved closer. Nina forced herself not to back away. Thought maybe you'd want to help out your old boyfriend. You know, for old time's sake. We broke up a year ago, and you're not getting any money from me. His smile vanished. You owe me, Nina. I paid for dinners, gifts, that weekend in Atlantic City. You mean the weekend where you got drunk and shoved me into a wall? Nina's hands shook, but she met his eyes. I don't owe you anything. Mark's face darkened. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne. You're working for someone with money now. Real money. I did some asking around. Adrian Romano, he whistled low. You really landed in it, didn't you? So here's how this works. You're going to give me $50,000, or I'm going to make your life very difficult. I don't have $50,000. Then get it, he leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that made her skin crawl. Because if you don't, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of girl you really are. Your new boss, his rich friends, those kids you care so much about. I'll ruin you, Nina. Just like you ruined us. He walked away, leaving Nina standing beside her car, shaking. She sat there for 20 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to breathe. Funding cut.
Job gone.
Mark back and threatening her. And somewhere across the city, Adrian Romano's offer sat like a lifeline she didn't want to grab. $200,000. Protection. Security detail. Nina pulled out the business card Adrian had slipped into her bag when she wasn't looking. Just a phone number, nothing else. She stared at it until the sun set. Then, hating herself a little, she made the call. I'll take the job, she said when he answered. But I have conditions. Name them. I'm doing this for Luca. Not for you. Not for your world. Just for him. There was a pause then. Understood. My driver will pick you up tomorrow at 9-inch. The line went dead. Nina sat in the growing darkness and wondered what she'd just agreed to. The black Mercedes that picked Nina up at 9 sharp didn't have a normal driver. It had 2 men in the front, both armed, both silent, and windows tinted so dark she couldn't see out. She clutched her single suitcase and tried not to think about what she'd gotten herself into. The drive took 40 minutes, leaving the city behind for rolling hills and estates hidden behind stone walls and iron gates. When they finally turned onto a private road, Nina's breath caught. Adrian Romano's house was actually a compound. A massive 3-story mansion sprawled across manicured grounds, all stone and glass and sharp architectural lines. Gardens stretched in every direction. She spotted a fountain, a tennis court, and what looked like a separate guest house. Armed men in dark suits patrolled the perimeter with dogs that were definitely not pets. The car stopped at the front entrance. A man opened her door. Not the driver, someone new, and gestured for her to follow without a word. Inside was worse. The foyer alone was bigger than Nina's entire apartment, all marble floors and a staircase that curved up like something from a movie. Crystal chandeliers. Original artwork. Everything pristine, cold, perfect. Like a museum where one wrong move would shatter the silence. And it was silent. Deathly silent. Staff members moved through the space like ghosts, a housekeeper dusting a table, Another man doing something with flowers, but no one spoke. No one made eye contact. They just worked with mechanical efficiency, their faces carefully blank. Miss Hayes' Rocco appeared from a side hallway, his scar catching the light. He looked even less friendly than he had at the hospital. This way. He led her through a maze of hallways, each more intimidating than the last. Nina caught glimpses of rooms as they passed, a library with floor-to-ceiling books, a dining room with a table that could seat 30, something that looked like a home gym with equipment that probably cost more than her car. House rules, Rocco said without looking back. You don't leave the property without clearance. You don't use your phone in secure areas. Someone will mark them for you. You don't ask questions about Mr. Romano's business. You don't talk to the press, the police, or anyone outside this estate about what you see here. Break any of these rules and you're gone. Understand? Crystal clear, Nina said, trying to keep the edge out of her voice. Rocco stopped at a door and pushed it open. Your room. It was beautiful. Large windows overlooking the gardens, a queen bed with silk sheets, an attached bathroom with marble everything. The closet was bigger than her old bedroom. Nina's suitcase looked pathetic sitting in the middle of all that luxury. Luca's room is 3 doors down on the left, Rocco continued. Mr. Romano's private wing is off limits unless summoned. Dinner is at 7. Someone will come get you, he paused at the door. We'll be watching you, Miss Hayes. Very closely. I'm here for Luca, Nina said firmly. That's it. We'll see. Rocco left, closing the door with a soft click that somehow sounded like a threat. Nina sank onto the bed, her heart racing. What had she done? This wasn't a home, it was a fortress. These people didn't trust her. They'd probably search her room the second she left. Maybe they'd already bugged it. A soft knock interrupted her spiral. Nina? She opened the door to find Luca standing there in pajamas covered in cartoon rockets, his dark curls messy, his face splitting into the biggest smile she'd seen yet. You came? He launched himself at her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Papa said you were coming, but I didn't believe it, and then Marco said he picked you up, and I've been waiting forever, and… Whoa, breathe. Nina laughed, hugging him back. The knot in her chest loosened slightly. This was why she was here. Hi, buddy. Want to see my room? I have a whole shelf of books and a TV, and Brutus sleeps on my bed, even though he's not supposed to, but Papa lets him anyway. I'd love to see it. Luca grabbed her hand and pulled her down the hallway. His room was exactly what she'd expected. Huge, filled with toys and books and expensive everything, but also unmistakably lived in. Drawings covered one wall. Lego creations cluttered the shelves. And sprawled across the bed was the biggest dog Nina had ever seen, a Tibetan Mastiff that raised its massive head and studied her with intelligent brown eyes. That's Brutus, Luca said proudly. He's my best friend. Well, except you now. You're my best friend too. Nina's throat tightened. I'm honored. They spent the next 2 hours in Luca's room. He showed her his favorite books, his rock collection, the drawings he'd made in the hospital. He told her about his homeschool teacher, his physical therapy sessions, how much he hated taking pills. And slowly, Nina began to relax. Until she felt eyes on her. She looked up to find Adrian standing in the doorway, still in a dark suit, watching them. His expression was unreadable, but something in his posture seemed off, tense, like he was seeing something he hadn't expected and didn't quite know what to do with it. Papa. Luca jumped up. Nina's here. She's going to stay forever, right? For now, Adrian said carefully. His eyes met Nina's over his son's head. Luca, let Miss Hayes settle in. She's had a long day. But… Luca, one word, gently said, but Luca fell silent immediately. Nina stood, suddenly aware of how casual she looked in jeans and a sweater in this palace of perfection. It's fine. I was just… Dinner in an hour, Adrian interrupted. Someone will show you to the dining room. He looked at his son. Bath time. Can Nina help? Adrian hesitated, and Nina saw the conflict flash across his face. He wasn't used to sharing his son. Wasn't used to someone else being part of Luca's routine. If Miss Hayes doesn't mind, he finally said. I don't mind, Nina said softly. Adrian nodded once, sharp and controlled, then left. But Nina caught him pausing in the hallway just out of sight. Watching. Always watching. Later that night, after bath time and dinner in a formal dining room where she and Luca sat at one end of that enormous table while Adrian worked through paperwork at the other end, Nina tucked Luca into bed. I'm glad you're here, he whispered, clutching his dinosaur. This place is scary sometimes. Nina smoothed his hair back. What do you mean? Everyone's always so quiet. And Papa's always working. And sometimes men come and they talk in loud voices, and then Papa gets this look on his face that makes me hide in my room. His eyes searched hers. But you're not scary. You're nice. Your Papa's not scary either, Nina said, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it. He's just protective. Will you stay? Really stay? Really stay, Nina promised. She left Luca's room to find Rocco waiting in the hallway, arms crossed. Touching, he said flatly. But don't get comfortable. We're still watching. Nina met his stare. Then watch. You'll get bored quickly. She walked past him to her room, feeling his eyes burning into her back. Behind a security monitor in his office, Adrian watched the interaction, his jaw tight. His son had never bonded with anyone this quickly. Not the nannies, not the tutors, not even his own grandmother. It unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. The test started on day 3. Nina woke to find a diamond bracelet on her bathroom counter, just sitting there, casually, like someone had forgotten it. She stared at it for a full minute, her stomach sinking. No one forgot, a bracelet worth more than her yearly salary at the shelter. She picked it up carefully and went straight to the head housekeeper, a stern woman named Rosa. I found this in my bathroom, Nina said, holding it out. Someone must have lost it. Rosa's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. I'll return it to Mrs. Chen. She took the bracelet. Thank you, Miss Hayes. Nina thought nothing of it until the next day, when an envelope stuffed with $100 bills appeared in her coat pocket, a coat she'd left hanging in the mudroom. $5,000, easy. She brought it directly to Rocco. This isn't mine, she said, placing it on his desk in the security office. Rocco leaned back in his chair, studying her. You sure? Could be a bonus. Mr. Romano's generous with staff who do good work. If it's a bonus, it would come in a paycheck with proper documentation. This is someone else's money. Nina met his eyes steadily. I don't take what isn't mine. He stared at her for a long moment, then took the envelope without a word. The incidents kept coming. A designer purse left in the hallway. An expensive watch on the kitchen counter. Each time, Nina returned them immediately, not even tempted. She'd grown up with nothing. She knew the difference between earned and stolen. What she didn't know was that every single item was a test. The questioning started during her second week. Miss Hayes' Rocco appeared while she was reading to Luca in the garden. A moment. Nina glanced at Luca, who was absorbed in his book. I'm in the middle of.
Now.
She sighed and followed him to a side patio, irritation prickling at her neck. What? Your ex-boyfriend. Mark Sullivan. Rocco pulled out a tablet, showing her surveillance photos. Mark outside her old apartment. Mark talking to someone in a bar. Mark at a pawn shop. He's been asking questions. Who are you meeting with on Tuesdays? No one. Tuesday is my day off, and I go to the library in town. Nina crossed her arms. And before you ask, I go alone, I read, and I come back. That's it. You don't find it suspicious that your ex shows up right when you start working for Mr. Romano? I find it terrifying, actually. Mark is abusive and obsessive. That's why I left him. Nina's voice hardened. If you're accusing me of working with him, you're wasting your time. I want nothing to do with that man. Rocco watched her carefully. He could be a liability. Then handle it however you handle things. But leave me out of it. Nina turned to walk away, then stopped. And for the record, if I was trying to spy on your boss or hurt Luca, I'd be a lot more subtle about it. I wouldn't have an obvious connection like an ex-boyfriend asking around. I'm not stupid. She left him standing there and returned to Luca, her hands shaking with residual anger. What she didn't see was Rocco's slight nod of approval. The surveillance was constant. Nina knew they watched her. She'd spot men in hallways, find her room slightly rearranged, notice the cameras in every corner. They monitored her phone calls, all three of them, to her sister, and probably read her texts. They knew she ordered the same turkey sandwich every Tuesday at the library cafe. They knew she donated half her first paycheck to New Hope Shelter. They knew everything. And Nina just kept being herself. She woke up early to help Luca with breakfast. She read him stories and played board games and sat through his physical therapy sessions, cheering him on. She learned his favorite foods and his fears, and the specific way he liked his pillows arranged. She never asked about Adrian's business, never snooped through rooms she wasn't supposed to enter, never tried to leverage her position. She was just kind. One evening, Nina was helping Luca with homework when one of Adrian's men, a younger guy named Marco, lingered in the doorway. "Need something?" she asked pleasantly. Marco shifted. "Boss wants to know if you need anything. Better furniture, different room, whatever." "I'm fine, thanks." "You sure? Most people ask for stuff. New TV, better car, shopping trips." Nina looked up from Luca's math worksheet. "I have everything I need. But if you're offering, the kids at New Hope Shelter could use winter coats. There's a charity drive next month." Marco blinked. "You want donations for other kids?" "If Mr. Romano's feeling generous," Nina smiled. "Otherwise, I'm good." Marco left shaking his head, and Nina returned to helping Luca carry the two in his addition problem. In the security office, Rocco, Marco, and two other men watched the monitors. "She's clean," Marco said, leaning back. 3 weeks, boss. She hasn't taken anything, hasn't asked for anything, hasn't tried to access restricted areas. She barely uses her phone except to call her sister about college textbooks." "Could be a long game," another man, Tony, muttered. "Gain trust, then strike." "With what?" Rocco countered. "She doesn't ask questions." When the Valentini crew came for the meeting last week, she kept Luca upstairs and put headphones on him, so he wouldn't hear. She didn't try to listen in, didn't try to see who was here. She just protected the kid. Maybe that's the play. Get close to the kid. Use him as leverage later. Marco snorted. "You see the way she looks at Luca? That's not fake. My sister's a teacher. I know what genuine care looks like. This girl would throw herself in front of a bus for that kid." "Everyone has a price," Tony insisted. "Yeah." Rocco pulled up a file on his screen. "She turned down a $50,000 bonus I left in her room last week. Said if Mr. Romano wanted to give her extra money, it should go through proper payroll with taxes." "Who the hell volunteers to pay more taxes?" The men fell silent. On the monitor, Nina was laughing at something Luca said, ruffling his hair. The boy beamed up at her with pure adoration. "Boss ain't gonna like this," Marco said quietly. "Like what?"
Tony asked.
"That she's exactly who she says she is. No angle, no scheme. Just a good person who actually gives a damn." Marco shook his head. He doesn't trust good people. Doesn't believe they exist. Rocco thought about the past 3 weeks. Every test they'd thrown at Nina, she'd passed without even knowing she was being tested. The planted items, the questions, the surveillance. She'd remained exactly the same. Honest, kind, focused only on Luca. It made her either the most dangerous person they'd ever encountered or the safest. "I'll tell Mr. Romano," Rocco said finally. "She's clear." "You sure?" Rocco watched Nina help Luca sound out a difficult word, patient and encouraging. He thought about his own daughter, about the kind of person he'd want watching her if something happened to him. "Yeah," he said. "I'm sure." That night, Rocco delivered his report to Adrian in his private study. "She's clean, boss. No criminal connections, no suspicious activity, no attempts to gain information or leverage. She's been tested extensively. She passes every time." Adrian stood by the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring out at the grounds. You're certain? As certain as I can be. She's not playing a game. Rocco hesitated. She's just taking care of your son. Adrian's reflection in the dark glass was unreadable. People always want something. Not her. We offered her cash, gifts, privileges. She turns it all down. Only thing she asked for was donations for some kids' shelter. Rocco paused. She's the real deal, boss. Adrian took a long drink. He'd watched every test himself on the monitors. Watched Nina return every planted item without hesitation. Watched her handle their interrogations with honest frustration instead of calculated responses. Watched her care for Luca like he was her own. It unsettled him more than any threat. Keep watching, Adrian said quietly. But ease off. No more tests. Boss. She's proven herself. Now let her do her job. Rocco nodded and left. Alone, Adrian watched the security monitor showing Luca's room, where Nina was reading a bedtime story, his son curled against her side, safe and content. For the first time in years, someone in his house wasn't afraid of him, wasn't trying to use him, wasn't playing an angle. And Adrian had absolutely no idea what to do with that. Nina's mistake was going back to her old neighborhood alone. She'd asked for the afternoon off to help her sister move some boxes into college storage. Adrian had agreed with a curt nod, and Marco had offered to drive her, but Nina had insisted on taking the car service herself. She needed a few hours away from the estate, away from the watchful eyes and constant surveillance. She should have known better. Nina was loading the last box into her sister's dorm when she felt it, that prickling awareness that someone was watching. She turned to find Mark leaning against a car across the street, arms crossed, that familiar smirk on his face. Fancy seeing you here, he called out. Nina's blood went cold. Emma, go inside. Who's that? Her younger sister asked, frowning. Nobody. Please, just go. Emma, bless her, recognized the fear in Nina's voice and disappeared into the dorm without argument. Mark crossed the street, moving with that casual confidence he'd always had, the kind that came from never facing real consequences. Nice car service. Black Mercedes, tinted windows, driver with a gun, he whistled low. You really hooked yourself a big fish, didn't you? Go away, Mark. I looked into your new boss. Adrian Romano. Mark's eyes gleamed. Do you have any idea who that is? The Romano family practically runs the city. Drugs, gambling, construction, they've got their fingers in everything. He moved closer. So, either you're the world's most naive nanny, or you're sleeping with a mafia boss. I'm taking care of his son. That's all.
Right.
His son, Mark laughed. Come on, Nina. A guy like that doesn't pay 6 figures for a babysitter unless he's getting something extra. You always were good at playing innocent while. Don't. Nina's voice shook with rage. You don't get to do this. You don't get to show up and make assumptions about my life. I'm not assuming anything. I'm stating facts. Mark pulled out his phone, showing her photos. Pictures of her entering the estate, of her in the garden with Luca, of her getting into the Mercedes. I've been watching, and I've been thinking. A man like Romano, with all that money, all that power, he won't want any loose ends. Like an ex-boyfriend who knows things. Nina's stomach dropped. What do you want? Same thing I wanted before. 50,000. But now I think it should be 100. Call it hazard pay for keeping my mouth shut about your little arrangement. His voice dropped. Pay me or I start talking to people. The press, his competitors, maybe the FBI. I'm sure they'd love to know about the mysterious woman living with Adrian Romano and his son. There's nothing to tell. I'm a caretaker. Then you won't mind if I make some calls. Mark stepped back, still smiling. You have 1 week, Nina. After that, things get messy. He walked away, leaving Nina shaking in the middle of the sidewalk. She didn't tell anyone at first. But the next Tuesday, when she went to the library, Mark was there, watching from across the street. Wednesday, he was at the coffee shop near the estate gates. Thursday, Nina found a note under her windshield wiper. 6 days left. Friday, she broke. There's a problem, she told Rocco. finding him in the security office. Her voice was steadier than she felt. My ex-boyfriend. He's following me. He wants money, and he's threatening to go to the press about me working here. Rocco's expression went dark. When did this start? Nina explained everything, the college encounter, the stalking, the threats. With each word, Rocco's jaw tightened. This Mark Sullivan, he said slowly, pulling up a file that was already remarkably detailed. He's been on our radar since you started. We've been tracking him. You have? Standard protocol. Anyone connected to household staff gets monitored. Rocco leaned back. He's got a record, 2 domestic violence complaints, both dropped. Bar fight last year. Gambling debts, his eyes met hers. Let me handle this. The way he said handle made Nina's blood run cold. She'd been here long enough to understand what that meant in this world. No, she said quickly.
Please.
I don't want anyone hurt. He's threatening you. Threatening this family. He's desperate and stupid, but he doesn't deserve. Nina couldn't even finish the sentence. Let me talk to him. Let me try to reason with him first. Reasoning doesn't work with men like that. Then let me fail at reasoning before you do. Whatever it is you're planning to do, Nina's voice cracked. Please, Rocco. I know what kind of world this is. I know what happens to problems. But I'm asking you, let me try it my way first. Rocco studied her for a long moment, then sighed. I need to tell the boss. Adrian listened to Rocco's report in silence, his expression carved from stone. They were in his office, Nina standing awkwardly near the door, while Rocco outlined the threat. With each detail, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. He's been stalking her for 2 weeks, Rocco finished. Following her, taking pictures. He wants 100,000 or he goes public. Then we eliminate the problem. Adrian's voice was calm, matter of fact. Permanently. No. Nina stepped forward. Please, Mr. Romano. I know Mark.
He's all talk.
If I can just explain that there's nothing inappropriate happening here, that I'm just a caretaker, he'll back off. Men who make threats don't back off. They escalate. Adrian's gray eyes locked onto hers. This is how things are handled in my world, Miss Hayes. But it doesn't have to be. Nina's hands clenched at her sides. I'm not asking you to ignore it. I'm just asking for a chance to handle it without violence. Let me meet with him, with your security there. Let me try. And when talking doesn't work, then I'll accept whatever you think is necessary. But please, let me try first. Nina's voice softened. You hired me because I'm different from your world. Let me be different. The silence stretched between them. Adrian's fingers drummed once on his desk, the only sign of internal debate. Boss, we can't risk, Rocco started. Arrange a meeting. Adrian cut him off, still watching Nina. Controlled location, full security presence. She gets 10 minutes to make her case. After that, we do this my way. Nina released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Adrian stood, moving around his desk with predatory grace. He stopped close enough that Nina had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. If he touches you, if he threatens you, if he so much as raises his voice, my men have orders to end this. Understood. Understood. And Miss Hayes? Something flickered in his expression. After this is handled, you don't leave the estate without security. No more solo trips, no more libraries alone. You're part of this household now. That means you're under my protection whether you like it or not. It should have felt like a cage, like control. But the way he said it, with something almost protective beneath the command, made Nina's breath catch. Okay, she whispered. Adrian nodded and turned to Rocco. Set it up. Public place, multiple exits, full team coverage. And Rocco. His voice went cold. If Sullivan makes any move toward her, you have my permission to handle it immediately. Yes, boss. As Nina left the office, she heard Adrian's voice one more time. And Rocco? I want surveillance on Sullivan doubled. If he so much as looks at her wrong before this meeting, I want to know. For the first time since Mark had reappeared, Nina felt something other than fear. She felt protected. The meeting with Mark never happened. 3 days before the scheduled confrontation, Mark Sullivan was arrested for outstanding warrants in Atlantic City, something about unpaid gambling debts and assault charges. Rocco had delivered the news with a perfectly neutral expression, but Nina wasn't naive. She knew Adrian had made a phone call, had pulled strings. She should have been angry about the manipulation. Instead, she felt only relief. But while one problem disappeared, another was growing in ways Nina didn't yet understand. "Nina's my favorite person in the whole world," Luca announced at breakfast, loud enough for the entire household staff to hear. Even more than Papa. Adrian looked up from his coffee, one eyebrow raised. "Is that so?" "Yup," Luca grinned, completely oblivious to the shift in the room's energy. "Papa, you're scary sometimes. But Nina's never scary. She's just nice." The housekeeper paused while pouring juice. Marco, standing by the door, coughed to cover what might have been a laugh. And Adrian's expression, for just a moment, showed something Nina couldn't quite read. Hurt, maybe. Or resignation. "Luca," Nina said gently, "your father loves you very much." "I know. But I still like you more right now." Luca returned to his pancakes, the proclamation already forgotten. But others wouldn't forget so easily. Across the city, in a villa that rivaled Adrian's estate for opulence but doubled it in ostentation, Sergio Valentini smiled as he listened to his informant's report. "The kid said what?" Sergio leaned back in his leather chair, gold rings glinting as he lit a cigar. "That the girl's his favorite. More than Romano, the informant." One of Adrian's household staff, who'd been on Sergio's payroll for months, shifted nervously. The whole staff heard it. "Kid's obsessed with her. And Romano. He lets her get away with everything. No background in our world, no family connections, and she's living in the main house. Has access to the kid. To Romano." Sergio exhaled smoke, his mind already working. "How long has she been there?" "Almost a month now. And Romano hired her himself? Personally?"
Yeah.
"After she spent the night with his kid at the hospital. Some story about her being a volunteer who calmed the boy down when no one else could." "Interesting." Sergio tapped ash into a crystal tray. "The great Adrian Romano, brought to his knees by a pretty caretaker and his sick son. Almost poetic. What do you want me to do?" "Nothing yet. Just keep watching. And start talking." Sergio's smile widened. "Let it slip to the other families that Romano's distracted. That he's going soft. A man who puts a woman and child before business is a man who's vulnerable." The informant nodded and left. Sergio made 3 phone calls that afternoon. By evening, whispers had begun circulating through the city's underground. Adrian Romano was losing his edge. Too focused on his son, too trusting of a stranger, too distracted to notice challenges to his authority. He turned down the Castellano deal, Sergio told Vincent Moretti, head of the North Side operations, over dinner. Said he was too busy with family matters. Adrian Romano, refusing a multi-million-dollar opportunity because of family matters. Vincent frowned. "That doesn't sound like him." "It's not. He's changing." Softening, Sergio leaned forward. "Word is there's a woman living in his house, close to his son. He's so focused on keeping the kid happy, he's losing sight of business." "You sure about this?" "I have people inside his operation. Trust me, the man's vulnerable right now. And vulnerability is opportunity." By week's end, 3 of Adrian's smaller allies had quietly begun negotiations with Sergio's organization. The whispers were working. Adrian's consigliere, a silver-haired man named Vincent Caruso, who'd served the Romano family for 30 years, waited until they were alone to speak. "We need to talk about the girl." Adrian didn't look up from the contract he was reviewing. "Nina is not a problem. She's becoming one." Vincent closed the door to Adrian's study, his expression grave. "Sergio's spreading rumors. Says you're distracted, that you're putting personal feelings before business. 3 of our associates have started taking meetings with him. Let them. Anyone who'd switch allegiances over rumors isn't worth keeping." "Adrian," Vincent's voice hardened. "This is serious. Luca telling the entire household that he prefers her to you? Staff members gossiping about how you've changed since she arrived? How you came home early last week just to have dinner with them. People are noticing. Noticing what? Adrian finally looked up, his voice dangerously quiet. That I spend time with my son. Noticing that you care. In this world, caring is weakness. Feelings are weapons that can be used against you. Vincent moved closer. I know you've been alone since Maria died. I know Luca needed someone. But this girl, she's making you soft. Making you vulnerable. She's making my son happy. And what happens when Sergio uses that happiness against you? When he threatens her to get to you? When someone decides the fastest way to hurt Adrian Romano is through the woman his son loves? Vincent's voice dropped. Feelings are dangerous, Adrian. You taught me that.
Your father taught you that.
The moment you care about something, you give your enemies a target. Adrian stood slowly, his full height and presence filling the room. Are you suggesting I fire her? I'm suggesting you remember who you are. What you are. Vincent met his gaze steadily. You're the head of the Romano family. You can't afford weakness. Nina is not a weakness. Then what is she? The question hung in the air. Adrian had no answer. Or rather, he had several answers, none of which he was ready to examine too closely. She stays, Adrian said finally. And if Sergio wants to interpret that as weakness, let him. He'll learn otherwise. Vincent sighed. I hope you're right. Because if you're wrong, it won't just be you who pays the price. It'll be her. And Luca. He left, and Adrian stood alone in his study, Vincent's words echoing in his mind. Feelings are dangerous. He'd built his entire life on that principle. Had locked away everything soft after Maria's death, focused only on power and control and keeping Luca safe. Feelings got people killed. Feelings made you vulnerable. But then Nina had walked into their lives, and suddenly his son was laughing again. Sleeping through the night. Eating without being coaxed.
Smiling.
And Adrian found himself coming home earlier than necessary. Found himself watching the monitors not for security purposes, but just to see Nina reading to Luca in the garden. Found himself thinking about her opinion when making decisions about his son. Feelings are dangerous. Vincent was right. But Adrian couldn't bring himself to do anything about it. Across the city, Sergio made his final call of the evening to his most trusted captain. I want full surveillance on Romano's girl. Every move she makes, every person she talks to. Find me something I can use. What are you planning, boss? Sergio smiled. Adrian Romano thinks he can have both, power and a family. I'm going to teach him that in our world, you only get to choose one. And when he's forced to choose, everyone will see exactly how weak he's become. He hung up and poured himself a drink, already imagining Adrian's face when everything fell apart. The game was just beginning. The call came at 4 a.m. on a Thursday. Nina jerked awake to pounding on her door. She stumbled out of bed to find Adrian standing in the hallway, still in his suit from whatever late-night meeting he'd been in. His hair was disheveled, his tie loose, and his expression. He looked terrified. It's Luca, he said, his voice rough. His fever spiked. We need to take him to the hospital.
Now.
Nina was dressed and in Luca's room within 2 minutes. The little boy lay in bed, his face flushed, his breathing shallow. When he saw her, tears spilled down his cheeks. I don't want to go, he whimpered. Please, Nina. I don't want more needles. I know, sweetheart. Nina sat on the edge of his bed, brushing his damp curls back. But we need to make sure you're okay. You'll come? I'm not leaving your side. St. Catherine's Hospital at 5 a.m. was eerily quiet, but the VIP wing erupted into controlled chaos the moment they arrived. Dr. Chen met them at the door, her expression grim. His blood work shows an infection. We need to do an emergency procedure to drain it before it spreads, she looked at Adrian. We need to prep him immediately. No. Luca's scream echoed through the hallway. He clung to Nina, his small body shaking. No more. I don't want to. 2 nurses approached with a gurney, and Luca's panic intensified. He buried his face in Nina's shoulder, sobbing. Please don't let them take me. Please. Nina's heart shattered. She looked at Dr. Chen. Can you give us a minute? We really need to. 5 minutes, Adrian said quietly, his voice leaving no room for argument. The medical staff stepped back. Adrian stood rigid in the doorway, his hands clenched at his sides, his face a mask that barely concealed his anguish. Nina carried Luca to a chair in the corner and sat down, pulling him into her lap even though he was really too big for it. He clung to her like a lifeline. Luca, look at me. She gently tilted his chin up. Remember the first night we met? In this hospital? He nodded, hiccuping. You were so scared. And I sat on the floor with you and we read stories, and we got through it together. Remember? You promised you wouldn't leave. And I didn't leave. I stayed all night. Nina wiped his tears with her thumbs. I'm making the same promise now. I won't leave. I'll be right there the whole time. They'll hold me down. No, they won't. Because you're going to be brave and let them help you. And I'll be holding your hand the entire time, and if you get scared, you squeeze as hard as you need to. Nina looked into his eyes. Can you do that? Can you be brave with me? Luca's lower lip trembled. What if it hurts? Then we'll tell them, and they'll help.
Dr. Chun is really good at her job.
She doesn't want you to hurt. She wants you to get better, so we can go home and finish building that Lego spaceship. The big one. The really big one, Nina smiled. But first, we need to take care of you. Deal? Luca buried his face in her neck for a long moment, then whispered, Okay. The prep room was sterile and bright. Nurses moved efficiently, setting up equipment, preparing medications. Luca sat on the examination table, rigid with fear, but he didn't scream, didn't fight. Nina sat on the floor beside him, just like that first night, holding his hand. Tell me about the spaceship, she said calmly as a nurse swabbed his arm for the 4. What color are we making the engines? Red. Luca's voice shook, but he focused on her. With yellow flames. That sounds awesome. What else? They talked about Legos and dinosaurs and whether Brutus would fit in the spaceship. Probably not. When the 4 went in, Luca squeezed Nina's hand so hard her fingers went numb, but he didn't pull away, didn't scream. You're doing so good, Nina murmured. So good. Dr. Chin worked quickly, explaining each step in language Luca could understand. When something stung, she acknowledged it. When Luca whimpered, she paused and let him breathe. And through it all, Nina stayed on that floor, her voice steady, her presence constant. Adrian watched through the observation window, unable to look away. Rocco stood beside him, silent. They'd both seen combat, had both witnessed things that would break most people. But watching his 6-year-old son fight through his terror, while a woman he'd known for barely a month gave him the courage to do it. Adrian's throat was tight. She's something else, Rocco said quietly. Adrian couldn't speak. He watched Nina, her jeans dirty from the hospital floor, her hair falling out of its ponytail, exhaustion written in every line of her body, and she was smiling at his son like he'd just conquered the world. You're the bravest kid I know, Nina was saying. The absolute bravest. Luca managed a weak smile. Really? Really? The procedure finished. Dr. Chin gave instructions to the nurses, then joined Adrian in the observation room. I've been a pediatric specialist for 15 years, she said, watching Nina help Luca drink some water. I've never seen a child that traumatized cooperate so completely. What she did in there, Dr. Chin shook her head. That's not training. That's a gift. Yes, Adrian said softly. It is. 2 hours later, after Luca had been settled in a recovery room and had finally fallen asleep, Adrian found Nina in the hallway. She was leaning against the wall, her eyes closed, looking completely drained. Miss Hayes. She opened her eyes. Is Luca still sleeping? He's fine. Adrian moved closer, studying her face. In the harsh fluorescent lighting, he could see the dark circles under her eyes, the worry lines around her mouth. You should rest. I'm okay. You spent 3 hours on a hospital floor. It's where I needed to be. Nina straightened, meeting his gaze. He needed to know someone was there. Someone who wouldn't leave. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. The experts, the child psychologists, the therapists, the specialists I've paid thousands of dollars to, none of them could do what you did in there. They all said it would take months of conditioning, of gradual exposure, he stopped. You did it in minutes. Nina shifted uncomfortably. I just talked to him. No. Adrian stepped closer, and Nina suddenly realized how tall he was, how much space he commanded even in this sterile hospital corridor. You made him feel safe. In his worst moment, when he was more terrified than I've ever seen him, you made him feel safe. Do you understand how rare that is? Nina's breath caught at the emotion in his voice, raw, unguarded in a way she'd never heard from him. He's a special kid, she said softly. And you're... Adrian stopped himself, his jaw tightening as if he'd almost said something he couldn't take back. You're exactly what he needs. Their eyes held. Something shifted in the space between them, an understanding, a recognition, a trust that hadn't existed before. Thank you, Adrian said finally, for being here. For him. Always, Nina replied, and meant it. Adrian nodded once, then turned and walked back toward Luca's room, his shoulders carrying a weight that seemed somehow lighter than before. Nina watched him go, her heart doing something complicated in her chest that she absolutely wasn't ready to examine. Behind them, Rocco had witnessed the entire exchange. He pulled out his phone and sent a single text to Vincent, Adrian's consigliere. Boss is in deeper than we thought. It's not just the kid anymore. Mark made bail after 4 days. Nina didn't know this until it was too late. She'd convinced Adrian to let her visit New Hope Shelter one last time. They were closing one of the wings due to funding cuts, and she wanted to say goodbye to the kids. Rocco had assigned 2 security guards to follow her, but Nina had asked them to wait in the car. The kids were already scared enough about losing their home. They didn't need men with guns hovering. Her first mistake. The second was staying after sunset. Nina walked out of the shelter into the parking lot at 7:30 p.m., her arms full of drawings the kids had made for Luca. The streetlight above her car was out. It flickered once, then died completely, plunging that section of the lot into shadow. Her instincts screamed danger. She turned back toward the shelter entrance, but Mark stepped out from behind a van, blocking her path. He wasn't alone. 2 men flanked him, big, rough-looking guys she didn't recognize. Hello, Nina. Her blood turned to ice. Mark, you're supposed to be in jail? He smiled, but his eyes were wild, desperate. Charges dropped. Funny thing about evidence, it disappears when the right people get paid. But that little stunt cost me everything I had. Lost my apartment, lost my job, lost my reputation. He moved closer. All because you had to run crying to your mob boss boyfriend. He's not my boyfriend. And I didn't. Shut up. Mark's voice cracked. You think I'm stupid? You think I don't know Romano had me arrested? That he made those charges appear out of nowhere? He was shaking now, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool evening air. I owe people money, Nina. Dangerous people. And the only way I'm getting out of this is with a big payout. Nina's heart hammered. Where were the guards? Mark, please. Romano will pay a fortune to get you back. $1 million, maybe more. Guy's obviously obsessed with you. Mark nodded to his companions. Grab her. Nina screamed. She threw the drawings at them and ran, but she only made it 3 steps before rough hands grabbed her arms. She kicked, thrashed, screamed louder. Gunshots shattered the night. Not aimed at her. Aimed at the sky. Warning shots. Let her go.
Now.
Rocco's voice, cold as death. He stood 20 feet away with 4 other men, all with weapons drawn. They'd materialized from nowhere, moving like shadows. The security guards she'd thought were waiting in the car had clearly been much closer. Mark's companions released Nina immediately, hands up. But Mark, stupid, desperate Mark, pulled out a knife and grabbed Nina around the waist, pressing the blade to her throat. Back off, or I cut her. His hand trembled, making the knife dig into her skin. Nina felt a warm trickle of blood. Last warning, Rocco said.
Let
Her go. I want a car and $100,000 or she. He never finished the sentence. One of Adrian's men, Tony, took the shot. Not lethal, but precise. The bullet hit Mark's shoulder, and he dropped the knife with a scream. Nina stumbled forward as he fell, and suddenly Rocco was there, pulling her away, putting himself between her and Mark. The other two men were already face down on the pavement, hands zip-tied behind their backs. Mark writhed on the ground, clutching his bleeding shoulder. You shot me. You psycho shot me. You put a knife to her throat. Rocco's voice was eerily calm. You're lucky that's all we did, he spoke into his radio. We need cleanup at the shelter. 3 suspects, 1 with a gunshot wound. And get the boss on the line.
now.
Nina couldn't stop shaking. Her legs gave out, and Rocco caught her, easing her down to sit on the parking lot curb. You're okay, he said, surprisingly gentle. You're safe. But Nina didn't feel safe. She felt the phantom pressure of the knife, the terror of Mark's hands on her, the horrifying certainty that she was about to die in a parking lot outside a children's shelter. Sirens wailed in the distance. Police, probably ones on Adrian's payroll, would arrive and make this all disappear. Mark would face real charges this time.
Attempted kidnapping.
Assault with a deadly weapon. But all Nina could think about was how close it had been. How if Rocco had been 5 seconds slower? She started crying and couldn't stop. Adrian arrived in 15 minutes, which meant he'd broken every speed limit in the city. He was out of his car before it fully stopped, striding across the parking lot with murder in his eyes. For a moment, Nina thought he was angry at her, for insisting on coming, for dismissing the guards, for being so stupidly naive. But he crouched in front of her, and his hands were gentle as he tilted her chin up to examine the cut on her neck. How bad? His voice was deadly quiet. Superficial, Rocco reported. Barely broke the skin. But he had the knife to her throat for approximately 45 seconds before Tony took the shot. Adrian's jaw clenched so tight Nina heard his teeth grind. His eyes, God, his eyes were blazing with a fury she'd never seen, not even when Sergio's men had shown up at the estate last week making threats. Where is he? Ambulance took him. He'll be under guard at the hospital, then straight to holding. I want him charged with everything possible. Attempted kidnapping, assault, extortion, I don't care what it costs. I want him buried, so deep he never sees daylight again. Already in motion, boss. Adrian's attention returned to Nina. He touched her neck so carefully, his thumb brushing just below the cut. Did he hurt you anywhere else? Nina shook her head, not trusting her voice. Can you stand?
She tried.
Her legs shook but held. Adrian stood with her, his hand steady on her elbow. You're going home. I can drive myself. You're in shock. Rocco will drive your car back. You're riding with me, it wasn't a request. He guided her toward his car, his hand never leaving her back. Protective. Possessive. The ride to the estate was silent. Nina stared out the window, her mind replaying the attack over and over. Adrian made 3 phone calls, all clipped, angry conversations about security failures and consequences. When they arrived, he didn't take her to her usual room. He led her to the main house's 2nd floor, to a hallway she'd never been allowed in before. The secure wing. His wing. You're staying here, he said, opening a door to a bedroom that was somehow both luxurious and fortress-like. Reinforced windows. A panic button by the bed. A door that looked like it could withstand a siege. Guest suite in the family wing. My room is next door. Luca's is down the hall. Adrian, I don't need. Yes, you do. He turned to face her, and the raw emotion in his expression stole her breath. This happened because I underestimated the threat. Because I didn't tighten security enough. Because his voice broke. You had a knife to your throat because I failed to protect you. This isn't your fault. You're under my roof. Under my protection. That makes you my responsibility. Adrian stepped closer, his voice dropping. And I don't fail twice. You stay in this wing where I can ensure your safety. You don't leave the estate without a full security team. And you never, ever dismiss the guards again. Understood? Nina should have felt trapped. Should have resented the control, the restrictions. Instead, she felt something else entirely. Okay, she whispered. Adrian's shoulders dropped slightly, tension releasing. He reached up and carefully brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering. Get some rest. I'll have Rosa bring you something to eat. He left before Nina could respond, closing the door softly behind him. Nina sank onto the bed, her fingers touching the small bandage on her neck, her heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. Everything had just changed. And they both knew it. The charity gala was supposed to be routine, a yearly event where the city's elite pretended to care about children's hospitals while making business deals over champagne. Adrian attended every year, wrote a massive check, and left early. This year, he'd asked Nina to come. It's for St. Catherine's pediatric wing, he'd said that morning. Luca wants you there. They're honoring Dr. Chin. Nina had reluctantly agreed, though being paraded around in a borrowed designer dress in front of people who terrified her wasn't her idea of a good time. Still, for Luca, who'd begged her to go, she'd do it. She should have known it was a trap. The event was held at the Grandview Hotel, all glittering chandeliers and orchestra music. Nina stayed close to Adrian, acutely aware of the stares. Women in jewels that cost more than cars whispered behind their hands. Men in expensive suits assessed her with calculating eyes. They're wondering who you are, Adrian murmured, his hand resting lightly on her lower back as they moved through the crowd. Let them wonder. But the whispers weren't just curiosity. Halfway through the evening, Nina overheard a conversation near the bar. Heard she's a federal plant. Showed up out of nowhere. Got close to Romano through the kid. Classic FBI playbook. Use the children. Gain trust. Nina's blood went cold. She glanced at Adrian, but he was deep in conversation with a hospital board member, oblivious. By the time dinner was served, the rumors had spread like wildfire. Nina excused herself to the restroom and pulled out her phone. 3 news alerts waiting. Mystery woman in Romano household. Federal informant. Anonymous source claims Romano's new employee has FBI ties. Is Adrian Romano being investigated through his son? Her hands shook as she opened the articles. They were all the same, vague insinuations, anonymous sources, claims that Nina Hayes had appeared suddenly in Adrian's life, gained unprecedented access to his family, and had suspicious gaps in her background that raised questions. It was all lies. Twisted truths and fabrications designed to look credible. And it was working. When Nina returned to the table, the atmosphere had shifted. Adrian's associates, men she'd seen at the estate, men who'd nodded politely at her before, now watched her with open hostility. Vincent, Adrian's consigliere, leaned close to Adrian and whispered something urgent. Adrian's expression went dark as he pulled out his phone, reading quickly. His eyes found Nina across the table. For a moment, something flickered in his face. Concern, maybe, or calculation. Then Sergio Valentini appeared at their table, like a shark smelling blood. Adrian. Good to see you. Sergio's smile was all teeth. And this must be the famous Miss Hayes. The whole room's been talking about you. Sergio, Adrian's voice was ice. We're in the middle of dinner. Of course, of course. I just wanted to say, such dedication. Working with children. Very admirable. Sergio's eyes gleamed with malice. Though I have to wonder, in these times, how thoroughly one vets their household staff. You can never be too careful, can you? Especially with family involved. The implication was clear. Adrian stood slowly, his full height and presence making Sergio step back. If you have something to say it clearly. No disrespect intended. Sergio raised his hands. Just friendly advice. We all have to protect our interests. He glanced at Nina. Enjoy your evening, Miss Hayes. He walked away, leaving poison in his wake. The ride home was silent. Nina sat in the back of the car, watching the city lights blur past, her stomach in knots. Adrian had left the gala immediately after Sergio's appearance, his face carved from stone. Back at the estate, she found Vincent, Rocco, and 3 other senior members of Adrian's organization waiting in his study. "You need to remove her," Vincent said without preamble. "Tonight." Nina stood in the doorway, frozen. Adrian sat behind his desk, his expression unreadable. "Explain." "Sergio leaked this story intentionally. He's trying to destabilize your alliances by making you look compromised." Vincent placed a tablet on the desk showing the news articles. "Already, the Castellano family has postponed next week's meeting. The Morettas are reconsidering their partnership. Your own men are asking questions. Let them ask." "Adrian, this is serious." Vincent's voice hardened. "If your associates think you're being investigated, if they think there's any possibility she's working with the feds, they'll distance themselves. You'll lose allies, lose contracts, lose respect. Then they're cowards. They're cautious. And they should be." Vincent slammed his hand on the desk. "You've known this girl for 6 weeks. 6 weeks, and you're willing to risk everything you've built because what? Because your son likes her? Because she's pretty? Because she makes you feel something?" The room went silent. Adrian's eyes were glacial. "Watch yourself, Vincent. Someone has to say it." Vincent looked at Nina, his expression almost pitying.
She needs to go.
"For her own safety and yours. Sergio won't stop with rumors. He'll escalate. And when he does, she'll be the target." "He's right," Nina said quietly. Everyone turned to her. She stepped into the room, her voice steadier than she felt. "This story, it's obviously false. But it doesn't matter. The damage is done. People believe it." She looked at Adrian. "I should leave. Go back to my old life. If I'm gone, Sergio has nothing to use against you." "No." Adrian's voice cut like a blade. "Adrian, please." "I said no." He stood, his presence dominating the room. "You're not leaving, but your business." "I don't care about my business right now. I care about what's right." Adrian moved around the desk, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're innocent. You've done nothing wrong. And I will not validate Sergio's lies by acting like you're guilty." "Boss," Rocco interjected carefully, "maybe we should consider." "I'm not considering anything." Adrian's voice rose. "This is a trap. Sergio wants me to push her out, wants me to look weak, wants everyone to think he can manipulate me into abandoning someone under my protection. And I won't do it." Vincent shook his head. "You're letting your feelings cloud your judgment." "My judgment is perfectly clear." Adrian turned to face his inner circle. "Nina Hayes stays. Anyone who has a problem with that can leave. Anyone who believes Sergio's lies can leave. Anyone who thinks I make decisions based on baseless rumors can get the hell out of my house." The room fell silent. "This will cost you," Vincent warned. "Then it costs me." Adrian's jaw set. "But she stays. That's final." Nina's throat tightened. He was risking everything, his reputation, his alliances, his carefully built empire, for her. Vincent gathered his papers, his expression grim. "I hope you know what you're doing." "I do." One by one, the men filed out, leaving Nina and Adrian alone. "You shouldn't have done that," Nina whispered. Adrian moved closer, stopping just inches from her. "Yes, I should have. They're right. I'm a liability. You're the only real thing in my world." His voice dropped, raw and honest in a way she'd never heard. "Everyone else has an angle, a scheme, something they want from me.
But you?
You just care. About Luca. About doing the right thing. You don't want my money or my power. You just want to help." "Adrian." When Vincent asked if I was willing to risk everything, the answer is yes.
For you.
For Luca. For what you've given us. His hand came up, cupping her face gently. "So no, you're not leaving. Not because of lies, not because of threats, not because of anything. Understood?" Nina couldn't speak. Could only nod. "Good." Adrian dropped his hand, his expression softening. "Now go check on Luca.
He's been worried about you."
Nina left on shaking legs, her heart pounding, knowing that everything had just shifted in ways she couldn't take back. Behind her, Adrian stood alone in his study, fully aware that he'd just chosen his heart over his head for the first time in his life. And he didn't regret it for a second. The fallout from the gala came swiftly. By morning, 2 more of Adrian's business associates had canceled meetings. A shipping contract fell through. Whispers circulated through the organization. Some believed the rumors, others questioned Adrian's judgment in keeping Nina despite the controversy. Sergio was winning. Nina felt it in the way staff members averted their eyes, in the tension that hung over the estate like a storm cloud, in the way Adrian's jaw stayed tight and his phone never stopped ringing with damage control. She'd caused this. Her presence had become a weakness Sergio could exploit, and everyone knew it. Everyone except Luca. "Why is Papa so grumpy?" he asked during their afternoon reading session in the garden. "He's just dealing with work stuff," Nina said, forcing a smile. "Is it because of you?" Nina's breath caught. "Why would you think that?" Luca shrugged, his 6-year-old wisdom cutting straight to the truth. "I heard Marco and Tony talking. They said Papa's fighting with his friends because of you. That bad men are saying mean things."
Luca.
"But they're wrong." Luca looked up at her with absolute certainty. "You're the best person I know. Even better than Dr. Chen, and she saved my life." Nina's eyes burned. "You're pretty great yourself, buddy. Are you gonna leave?" The question hit like a punch. "What?" "Everyone leaves eventually. My mom left.
My old nanny left.
Even Grandma doesn't visit anymore." Luca's voice got smaller. "Are you gonna leave too?" Nina pulled him close.
No, sweetheart.
"I'm not going anywhere. Promise." She shouldn't promise. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, whether Adrian would eventually decide she was too much trouble, whether Sergio's campaign would force her out. But Luca was looking at her with those huge, trusting eyes. "I promise," she whispered. Adrian found them there an hour later, Nina reading while Luca dozed against her shoulder in the fading sunlight. He stood watching for a moment, something tightening in his chest. Vincent's words from the night before echoed, "You're letting your feelings cloud your judgment." Maybe he was. But looking at his son, peaceful, safe, happy, Adrian couldn't bring himself to care. "Luca," he said softly, "time to come inside." Luca stirred, blinking sleepily. "Can Nina come? She has the evening off. Go wash up for dinner." Luca hugged Nina goodnight and trudged toward the house, leaving them alone in the garden. "You should take the evening off too," Adrian said. "You've been with him all day." "I don't mind." "Nina," his voice was gentle but firm.
Rest.
"That's an order." She nodded and left, and Adrian watched her go, his mind a tangle of thoughts he didn't want to examine. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Adrian sat in his study at 11 p.m., nursing a scotch and reviewing security reports that all said the same thing. Sergio was escalating. More rumors, more pressure on Adrian's allies, more attempts to isolate him. The smart play was obvious. Remove Nina, prove the rumors false, stabilize his organization. But every time he considered it, something in his chest revolted. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Papa." Adrian looked up to find Luca in the doorway, clutching his dinosaur, his hair messy from sleep. "What are you doing up?" Adrian set down his glass and opened his arms. Luca climbed into his lap, something he rarely did anymore. "Bad dream." "About what?" "Nina leaving. Like Mama did." Luca's voice was small. "You're not gonna make her go away, are you?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "What makes you think that?" "Vincent said you should. I heard him yesterday. He said she's making things complicated." Adrian made a mental note to have a conversation with Vincent about discussing business, where Luca could overhear. "Things are complicated sometimes. That doesn't mean we give up on people." Luca was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Papa, do you like Nina?" The question caught Adrian off guard. "Of course I like her. She takes good care of you." "No, I mean," Luca scrunched up his face, searching for words. "Do you like her like you like Mama?" Adrian's heart stuttered.
Luca.
Because I think she likes you. And I like her. So maybe she could stay forever? His voice got hopeful. Like a family? Adrian didn't know what to say. His son was 6 years old, still believing the world worked in simple, happy ways. It's more complicated than that, he said finally. Why? Because Adrian struggled to explain his world to someone who still believed in happy endings. Because people lie, Luca. They pretend to be one thing when they're really something else. They want things from you. And you can't always tell who's real and who's pretending. Luca tilted his head, considering this with the seriousness of a much older child. Have I ever lied to you, Papa? No, of course not. Have you ever lied to me? Adrian hesitated. He'd hidden things, certainly. Protected Luca from the uglier parts of their world. I've kept things from you. To keep you safe. That's different, Luca decided. Then, with the simple wisdom of a child, he said, Everyone lies, Papa. Even the good people. Vincent lies to make you feel better. Rocco lies when he says vegetables taste good. Dr. Chin lied when she said the shot wouldn't hurt. Adrian almost smiled. That's true. But Nina doesn't lie, Luca said it with absolute certainty. Not even little lies. When I ask if something will hurt, she tells me the truth. When I ask if she's sad, she doesn't pretend she's not. When I asked if she was scared when the bad man grabbed her, she said yes, because being brave doesn't mean not being scared. Adrian's breath caught. Everyone lies, Luca repeated, except Nina. The words hit Adrian like a physical blow. He thought about the past 6 weeks. Every test they'd run, every suspicion they'd harbored, every moment they'd waited for Nina to slip up, to show her true colors, to reveal some hidden agenda. And she never had. She'd returned every planted item, answered every question honestly, even when the truth made her look bad. Admitted when she was scared, when she didn't know something, when she needed help. She'd never tried to manipulate, never played games, never angled for more than what she'd been given. In a world where everyone wanted something, where every smile hid a knife, where trust was a weapon used against you, Nina had been unflinchingly, sometimes painfully real. Everyone lies, Papa. Except Nina. Adrian's chest constricted. All this time, he'd been waiting for her mask to slip. Waiting for the moment she revealed her true intentions. Waiting for proof that she was like everyone else in his world. But she wasn't. She never had been. And somewhere along the way, his gratitude for her care of Luca had shifted into something else entirely. Something that had nothing to do with his son, and everything to do with the way she challenged him, stood up to him, refused to be intimidated by his world, while remaining unfailingly kind within it. The way she'd looked at him in the study after the gala, not with fear or calculation, but with genuine concern for what his decision would cost him. The way his day felt incomplete until he saw her smile. The way he found himself making excuses to come home early, to check on Luca just so he could see her, to walk past her room at night and feel some unnamed tension ease just knowing she was safe under his roof.
Oh.
Papa. Luca's voice pulled him back. You okay? Adrian realized his hands were shaking slightly. He set Luca down carefully, his mind reeling. Yeah, buddy. I'm okay, his voice came out rough. You should get back to bed. You're not gonna make Nina leave, right? No, Adrian's voice was firm now, certain. She's not going anywhere. Luca hugged him tight.
Good.
Because I love her. The words echoed in Adrian's mind long after Luca had gone back to bed. I love her. Simple.
Honest. Real.
Adrian walked to his window, looking out over the grounds, and let himself finally acknowledge the truth he'd been fighting. He'd been falling for Nina Hayes since the moment he'd found her asleep on a hospital floor with his son. Maybe before that. Maybe from the second she'd looked at him without fear and promised to stay with a terrified little boy. She was the only real thing in his world. The only person who didn't want anything from him except to be allowed to care. She'd walked into his fortress and somehow made it feel like a home. And he'd been too afraid to admit it until his 6-year-old son stripped away all his carefully constructed defenses with 8 simple words. Everyone lies, Papa. Except Nina. Adrian pressed his palm against the cool glass and finally let himself feel it. All of it. The fear, the want, the bone-deep need to keep her safe. To keep her close. To stop pretending this was just about Luca. Tomorrow, Sergio would still be a threat. His allies would still be wavering. The rumors would still be circling. But tonight, Adrian Romano let himself admit he'd fallen in love with the woman who'd changed everything. And there was no going back from that. 6 weeks after Luca's innocent revelation changed everything, Nina sat under an old oak tree in the estate's garden, reading Where the Wild Things Are for probably the 100th time. Again, Luca groaned, but he was smiling. He looked different now, healthier. Color in his cheeks, energy in his movements, the hollowness gone from his eyes. Dr. Chun had called it a miracle at his last checkup. Nina just called it what happened when a child felt safe. It's a classic, Nina defended. Besides, you love this one. I love it because you love it. Luca leaned against her shoulder, content. The garden had become their spot over the past month. After everything, the rumors, the threats, the tension, Adrian had slowly loosened the restrictions. No more armed escorts to the library. No more locked wings. The fortress had softened into something that almost felt like a home. The staff had changed too. Rosa smiled at her now. Marco joked with her about Luca's latest antics. Even Rocco had grudgingly admitted she was all right after she'd beaten him at chess 3 times in a row. She belonged here. Somehow, impossibly, this strange world had become hers. Nina? Luca's voice interrupted her thoughts. Can I ask you something? Always. Are you going to marry Papa? Nina nearly dropped the book. What? Vincent said Papa's been different since you came.
Happier.
And I heard Marco tell Tony that you and Papa look at each other weird. Luca tilted his head. Is that what grown-ups do when they like each other? Heat flooded Nina's face.
Luca.
Because I think it would be really cool if you married him. Then you could be here forever, forever. Not just regular forever. Nina's throat tightened. Over the past weeks, things had shifted between her and Adrian. Lingering glances across the dinner table. His hand brushing hers when he handed her coffee. The way he'd started joining their reading sessions, sitting quietly nearby, just present. Neither of them had acknowledged it, hadn't named it. But Luca, in his 6-year-old wisdom, had seen it anyway. Your father and I, Nina struggled for words. We care about each other, but it's complicated. Why do grown-ups always say that? Luca sighed dramatically. Things are only complicated if you make them complicated. When did you get so wise? I'm 6.5 now. Practically ancient. Nina laughed and pulled him closer, breathing in the simple peace of the moment. Spring had arrived, the garden blooming with flowers Rosa had planted. Birds sang in the trees. Brutus dozed nearby, his massive body stretched out in the sun. Mind if I join you? Nina looked up to find Adrian walking across the lawn. No suit jacket today, just slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. No Rocco hovering nearby. No security detail shadowing his steps. Just him. Papa. Luca jumped up. Nina's reading our book again. I heard. Adrian's lips twitched. I could hear you groaning from my office. I wasn't groaning that loud. You were pretty loud, buddy. Adrian's eyes met Nina's, something warm and unguarded in them. Mind if I sit? It's your garden, Nina said, suddenly shy. He settled beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Luca immediately wedged himself between them, forcing them closer together. Luca, Adrian warned.
What?
There's not enough room. Luca's voice was pure innocence, but his grin was mischievous. Nina bit back a smile. The kid was matchmaking, and doing a surprisingly good job of it. Read, Nina, Luca commanded.
So she did.
And as Max sailed away to where the wild things are, Nina felt Adrian's arm settle behind her on the tree trunk. Not touching, not quite, but there. Present. Protective. When she finished, Luca announced he wanted to play with Brutus and ran off, leaving them alone in the dappled shade. "He's not subtle," Adrian said quietly. "No, he's not." Nina closed the book, her fingers tracing the worn cover. "Did you know I bought this book 6 years ago? I was broke, barely making rent, but I saw it in a used bookstore and thought someday I'd read it to kids who needed it. And now I read it to a kid who's changed my life." She looked up at Adrian. "You know what's funny? That night at the hospital, I thought I was there by mistake. Wrong room, wrong kid, just a random accident." "It wasn't an accident." Adrian's voice was soft. "I don't believe in accidents anymore." No. He shifted slightly, and suddenly his hand was covering hers on the book. "Sergio's backing off, by the way. Turns out publicly calling someone a federal informant when you have no proof is a good way to lose credibility. Most of my allies have returned. Stronger than before, actually. I heard. Rocco mentioned it. Mark Sullivan accepted a plea deal. 20 years, no parole. He won't bother you again." Nina nodded. She'd known, but hearing it confirmed still brought relief. "And you," Adrian continued, his thumb brushing across her knuckles, "have officially been here 3 months. Which means you've passed your probation period." "I didn't know I was on probation." "Everyone's on probation in my world." His eyes searched hers. "But you're not in my world anymore, Nina. You are my world. You and Luca." Nina's breath caught. "Adrian, that first night, when I found you sleeping on the floor with my son, I thought you were a threat.
An anomaly.
Something to be investigated and neutralized." His voice dropped. "I didn't realize you were an answer." An answer to what? To the question I'd stopped asking. Whether someone could exist in my life without an agenda. Whether trust was still possible. Whether I could be more than just what I do. He cupped her face gently. "You didn't just save my son, Nina. You saved me too." Tears blurred Nina's vision. "I was just being myself." "I know. That's what made it extraordinary." Adrian leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers.
Stay.
"Not as Luca's caretaker. Not as an employee.
Stay as family.
As mine. If you'll have us." "Adrian Romano, are you asking me to?" "I'm asking you to build a life here. With me. With Luca. No more tests, no more suspicion. Just
Us."
Nina's answer was to close the distance between them, her lips finding his in a kiss that tasted like hope and new beginnings. When they finally pulled apart, Luca's voice carried across the garden. "Finally. I thought you'd never kiss her, Papa." They looked over to find him watching with Rocco, Marco, Rosa, and half the household staff, all trying very badly to pretend they hadn't been spying. Adrian groaned. "We're never living this down." "Nope," Nina agreed, laughing. But she didn't care. Because she'd walked into this estate 3 months ago carrying nothing but a worn book and a promise to stay with a scared little boy. And she'd found everything she'd never known she was looking for. A family. A home. A love built on the most unexpected foundation. One night on a hospital floor when a stranger had chosen kindness over convenience. Adrian had said his gift changed her life. He was right. But not because of money or protection or security. Because he'd given her something rarer than any of that, a place where she belonged, where she was chosen, where love wasn't complicated by lies or agendas, where she was simply, finally, home. "Come on," Adrian said, standing and pulling her up with him. "Let's go face our audience before they start planning the wedding." "Too late," Luca shouted. "Rosa says June is perfect for weddings." Nina laughed, her hand secure in Adrian's, and let herself be pulled toward their strange, wonderful, perfectly imperfect family. The wild rumpus had just